Hi, I'm Beth Wilson. I'm one of the hosts of STEM in 30, a television program produced at the National Air and Space Museum for middle school students. Today is our last live chat in conjunction with National History Day. So if you're watching, be sure to tell us where you're watching from in the comments section and submit your questions also in the comment section. We'll get to as many of those as we can today. Our special guest today is NASA astronaut Dr. Stan Love. Stan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Stan, you've had a variety of jobs at NASA. You helped build the International Space Station. You've worked as capcom and mission control. You're currently working on the interfaces for the Orion capsule. And we know that a lot of those jobs requires an enormous amount of communication, which we'll get to shortly. But I wanted to start today by asking you, what happens when communication fails?
Well, whatever you're doing fails. If what you're doing requires more than one person to do it, without communication, nothing's going to happen. And nowhere is that more true than in space travel. I worked for 8 years in mission control as a capcom, and that's the person, usually an astronaut, who sits next to the flight director. And anything the flight control team on the ground needs the crew to know, the capcom tells them. So it's up to the capcom to understand exactly what the crew is doing, exactly what information they need, in what format they need it, and then to make a call that's clean and concise, has no extra syllables, no errors, no ums nor ahs, everything absolutely perfect. And by the way, if you read up a number to a crew member who's typing into the flight computer to make the engines burn and go somewhere new, and one of those numbers is wrong, people can die. So this is serious. So that's the job of the capcom, is to make that all happen. And then their secret unwritten job is, after they unkey the microphone, after they've said their piece to the crew, the main message that the crew needs to have understood is, we love you. Because it's hard to work in space. It's dangerous. It's scary. You know, astronauts are brave and well-trained, but they still know that if something goes wrong, it's not going to go well for them.
Yeah, anything.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. And the thing they need to understand the most is that the ground team is there to support them. And the way that support comes through most clearly is in the voice of their capcom. It has to sound confident. Everything has to be right. But the underlying message with your tone of voice and what you say has to be, we are with you 100% of the way, and we're working hard to make sure that everything goes perfectly for you.
So even if you're freaking out on the inside, you are calm, clear, and collected, whatever you're saying.
That's your job.
Well, we have a lot of questions already coming in, and so I'm going to start with this is a big question, and I think you'll appreciate it. Somebody would like to know, how important is communication going to be for future trips to Mars?
Oh, that's a great question. How much time you got? It's going to be a long answer. So the bad news is, when you go to Mars, you're far from the Earth, and the further away your radio transmitter and receiver are apart, the less information you can pack into that transmission. So we're going to need gigantic antennas, the ones that we use for controlling the robots on Mars, to get voice back and forth between the crew and the ground. The other problem is, once you get further away than about the moon, it takes time for radio waves to get there. You're going to say something, and it could be 10, 15, 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes before the listener gets that answer. And if you've ever tried to have a voice communication, say long distance via satellite, where there's a 1 second delay between your message leaving your mouth and getting it to your partner's ear, you already have problems. You kind of finish a sentence, but you don't quite finish, and then you add something onto it, but the other person thinks you stopped, and they start talking, and you step on each other's communication that way. 1 second of delay. When we go to Mars, we're going to have up to 20 minutes one way, 40 minutes round trip delay. And NASA has experimented with this sort of thing a lot, doing simulated space missions where we artificially insert into our communication systems that kind of a delay. And conversations fall apart at 5 seconds delay. We did an exercise one time where there was a couple of minutes of delay. and we ran a simulated medical emergency on board the spacecraft. We had a flight surgeon in mission control trying to manage the situation. And that person was reacting to what they were seeing coming in on the TV feed and giving instructions, which the crew then received minutes later. And there was such a big disconnect between the crew trying to save the life of their crewmate and the flight surgeon, again, all simulated, on the ground, that that particular scenario would not have turned out well for the victim. So this is huge. And in fact, the folks listening today are probably going to be better suited to MarsCom than people like me, because everybody listening today is used to text messaging, where you frequently get an immediate response, but you don't always, and you can cope with that. And sending text messages back and forth is actually a technique that we've tried on some of our simulations, and it works great. So you have to think of it not as a phone call, but as text messaging or emailing, when you're really far away and it's tens of minutes before you can get a response. And using those tools that some of the folks listening today are, they're already native to that. They know how to do it instinctively, is going to be key to good communications from Mars. So a very excellent question. And it's one we have been working on hard at NASA. We don't have all the bugs ironed out, but we think we've got some ways to go forward based on technology that you're using every day.
And most of the students who are watching right now are probably the perfect age to be.
Well, we thought that when I was that age, so.
Well, we do
Fingers crossed.
Mars
is difficult, and it seems like it's always 20 years away.
We do have a lot of people watching. We've got the second grade students from Our Lady of Hope St. Luke School, fifth graders from Green Valley Elementary in Sinking Spring, Pennsylvania, the International Women's Air and Space Museum in Cleveland, fifth grade students from the I Promise School in Akron, and Mrs. Haas, fifth grade class from West Virginia. So thank you all for watching. Be sure to get those questions into the comment section and keep letting us know where you're watching from. Another question, as working in mission control, did you ever work on a mission that was canceled or delayed, and how did you feel about that?
So missions are delayed all the time. Cancellation does not happen very often anymore. It's usually the whole program that gets canceled. But my own space flight was delayed. We were down in Florida. We got up that morning. We were getting ready to get in our suits. And then they announced that some of the fuel tank sensors in the space shuttle we were supposed to take that day were not working. And we are not going to go fly with bad fuel tank sensors. Interestingly, if you run your car dry of gasoline, it kind of sputters and stops and you're embarrassed. If you run a space shuttle main engine dry of propellant, once the slug of air hits the turbo pump, the engine explodes. So we don't want that. So we really want to fly with good sensors so that we don't accidentally run an engine dry. And we had, hundreds of guests down there in Florida ready to watch us go, and we were ready to go. And nope, 2 months later, they fixed the sensors, and it happens all the time. And then as a Capcom, it frequently happens that you're getting ready to go into mission control for the first shift of the flight, and there was bad weather at Kennedy Space Center, and they didn't launch, and all your plans are on hold. And oh, by the way, all your shifts are delayed by 30 minutes compared to what you thought they were going to be because of the orbital mechanics between shuttle and station. So any work in spaceflight and by extension in aviation, delay is a fact of life, and you have to be very flexible. Don't get too attached to the plan, because you are certainly going to have to make a new one.
This may be the most hilarious question we've gotten, and so I'm just going to ask.
Now I'm worried.
So the question is, upon returning to Earth, if you toss an unpopped popcorn out the window, will it burn up immediately, or will it actually pop first?
I presume this means during reentry when it's hot.
Yeah, and okay. I know that you can't roll down that window.
And you don't want to, because outside it's sort of a vacuum, and all the air will go out of your spaceship immediately when you roll the window down, and that's bad. And then 3,000 degree plasma would come in the window, and that's bad. We really want to avoid that sort of thing in spaceflight. So the thing that makes popcorn pop is it gets really hot on the inside, and there's a little bit of moisture inside that popcorn kernel. And eventually, the pressure of the steam inside the kernel overcomes the strength of the dried husk of that kernel, and the husk bursts. And then, since the water is all throughout the starch inside that corn kernel, it puffs it up like styrofoam. There's little bits of water vapor all through it, not just one piece that would explode out the side. So it doesn't matter how you heat that kernel, that's going to be the behavior. So if you threw it out the window, it would start getting scorched, but just like on the stove top, or if you throw it on the hot rocks on a campfire, which is how popcorn was invented, by the way, it will pop before it burns up entirely.
I am so impressed that you know so much about popcorn. I'm glad we got
Well,
that.
you have to know these things when you're an astronaut.
Uh,
Not really.
Mrs. Ha's fifth grade class would like to know, how much schooling do you need before you become an astronaut? So what kind of schooling?
So first of all, you have to learn all about popcorn. No, I'm teasing. You don't really need to know that. So I went through grade school, middle school, which at the time we called junior high, high school. Then I went to college and I majored in a science, so it was physics. Then you sort of have a couple of options. There's the test pilot route, where you would join the Navy or the Air Force, get a master's degree in engineering, and be a test pilot, testing new aircraft or new aircraft systems. The other route is the academic route, which is the one I took. So after college, I went to graduate school and spent 6 years earning a doctorate in astronomy. A doctorate is not required, but they want to make sure that you're making good progress in your science career before they would hire you as an astronaut. And then in my case, I worked for a few years as a postdoctoral researcher, and then did a career change to become an engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory before they picked me up as an astronaut. So it's a lot of schooling. A master's degree at the bare minimum has to be in a science or technical field. And by the way, being a teacher in a technical field is qualifying. And then the beginnings of a career where you're showing promise and making good progress as time passes. But the technical part is key. I saw that part of the title of this event is STEM, and STEM is what makes it happen. All of the, English is wonderful, law is great, but all the English and law in the world will not make a rocket fly.
We have a lot of people watching from New Mexico, Michigan, Pennsylvania, South Florida, California, Texas, Alaska, and India. We have homeschoolers from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Kansas. We've got Sharon Elementary, Camelot Elementary, Virginia Virtual Academy, and I think it's Nick Elementary in Alaska, the 4th grade, and Mrs. Kirk's 1st grade class in Rock Hill, in Leslie Elementary in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So we're getting a lot of really good questions. Keep those questions in. We've got a lot of people asking, do you know when we plan to go to the moon again?
Absolutely. We are working our little rear ends off on that right now, all of us all over NASA. Just a week and a half ago, I was down in Mississippi at Stennis Space Center, watching a test of the rocket engines for the first stage of the rocket that's going to take people to the moon. So right now, we hope late this year, we're going to fly a version of our space capsule that will fly to the moon without crew on board. Then in 2023, so 2 years from late this year, we hope to fly it with crew on board on a test flight it will go near the moon, but not to the moon. During that time, we're going to be putting together the lander that will take the crew from the capsule down to the lunar surface, because the capsule we have can't land on the moon all by itself. That takes way more fuel than we could ever put on board. So we're going to have a separate vehicle to take the astronauts down to the surface. And currently, on paper, 2024 for the lunar surface. Although everything has to go exactly right for that to happen on time. Some things have already not gone exactly right. So I have low confidence that we're going to make 2024, but it'll be as soon after that as we can possibly manage.
Can you tell us about how important the work is that you're doing with the Orion space capsule and those astronaut interfaces on there?
Okay, so what I'm working on, although I'm an astronomer, from my years at NASA, I noticed that sometimes, especially in the space shuttle, which was very old, there were some controls that were confusing. And you don't want confusing controls in a spaceship, because if you push the wrong button at the wrong time, extremely bad things can happen. So you want all the buttons to be very clear, all the functions to be very clear. And then on Orion, we are actually using a lot of electronic displays to show the crew members information. In the shuttle, it was all hardware gauges and physical switches. On Orion, you're going to have a little mouse-like thing that moves a cursor around a screen, and you can select items to look at. And we have just a few hardware switches to control functions that you absolutely need to have work, and you absolutely need to have work even if, say, most of the power is out or most of the computers are out on the vehicle. So the switches you saw in those pictures are emergency functions, and sort of bare bones minimum control that you would need even if all of your screens were dark. And it's a bad day when all your screens go dark.
Yeah.
So we have redundant power supplies and redundant computers and all that. So that never happens. We still have the switches just in case. So my job, which again, I'm an astronomer, right? I wasn't trained in human factors engineering, but once I started doing it, I found it's very cool. I said, boy, these controls on the shuttle are confusing. Could we do better? And as soon as you ask that question, folks say, well, we've got a team that's working on that. How would you like to join it? Okay, we'll see what happens. So my job is to imagine a good way to present information to the crew, help make a mock-up of how that would work. Then we take other astronauts and stick them in the mock-up and ask them to work the controls and get their feedback on whether they thought this was good or bad or confusing or clear or what. Then we make refinements based on their recommendations and hopefully come up with better controls. I've been doing this now as my main job for about 3 years, and it's really fascinating, and there's a ton of work to do. As a scientist, I'm interested because human factors includes psychology. It includes the science of perception. How does the light that hits your eyeball end up being a signal in your brain that you can interpret? Interesting things like the way your eyesight and hearing is logarithmic. That is, a little change at high volumes makes no difference, but a little change at low volumes makes enormous difference. Just all very interesting. And it's been a blast. And I hope that when we're done, we'll have good displays and controls, because if we don't, everybody in my office will know who to blame.
Well, Marty and I got an opportunity to sit in the Orion capsule, which will lead me directly into the next question that we have up. That Sydney, who is 10, I'm sorry, wait, we'll get to Sydney's question next. Someone has asked, how do you get along with your coworkers when you're stuck on a rocket in space? And are there counselors? Because you can see Mark could barely fit in that capsule, so it's a pretty tight squeeze.
Someone's thinking. Well, so for my flight on the space shuttle, and this was about 10 years ago, my crewmates and I were named to the flight. The first thing we did was all move into an office together for our training. And so we started getting used to being with each other. Most of our socializing ended up being with our crewmates and their families, so you know their families really well. Then to work on that specific skill, and by the way, social skills are trainable. And if I could give one message to myself back at age 15 when I was very shy, it would be social skills are trainable. So if you have any wishes for better social skills, those can be improved. Get on it soon and you'll be a happier person in the long run. But anyway, so they sent the 7 of us crewmates and our lead flight director, who was going to be working with us in mission control, out to the wilderness in Utah with 80-pound packs to scramble up and down canyons and cross swollen rivers and get dirty and exhausted and hungry and thirsty and mad and mean and still work well together. And we had instructors out there with us to help us work well together. And if we had, any kind of altercation during the day, we would talk about it at night and what we could have done to avoid that. Incredibly valuable training. And then when you get up into space, of course, where every day of work is the most important day of your entire life. And oh, by the way, if you can't work with your crewmates, you're probably not going to fly in space again, because the number one skill for space flight, and I tell everybody who wants to be an astronaut, I tell them this, the number one skill is teamwork. You can be super smart, no teamwork, bad astronaut. You can be the world's best pilot, no teamwork, bad astronaut. So teamwork is absolutely key, and everybody knows this. And on a 2-week flight, no matter whether the guy you're flying with makes that whistling noise in his nose when he sleeps and just irritates you, I don't like the way he chews his food, you can put up with that for 2 weeks. Now, my colleagues on the space station for 6 months have a more difficult time with that, because 6 months is a long time. But every space station crew that I have worked with as Capcom or seen on TV has put professionalism first, and they always are able to do their work together, even if they're not best buddies. Now, when we send people to Mars and it's a small crew and they're closed up for something like 3 years, that's going to be a real challenge. And of course, there are horror stories about from the early history of polar exploration of personality conflicts, not leading to people coming to blows, but making it so that everybody on that expedition had an absolutely miserable time.
Right.
So working together with your coworkers, 100% most key skill you would need to be an astronaut, being able to be professional even if you're not best buddies with that person. And that too is trainable.
Well, your cat got a shout out.
All right. Which one? We have 3.
Whatever one is walking behind you at any time, I think is. We've got a lot of homeschoolers watching from all over. We've got 4th graders from Davenport Basis School in South Phoenix, Mrs. Camilla's 4th grade class in Buffalo, New York. We've got people from Texas, the Ukraine, South Carolina, New Jersey, New York, Brazil, Arizona, Montana. So keep those questions coming in. And as I promised, I will go back to Sydney's question. Sydney is 10, and she would like to know, what is your best memory from your trip on Atlantis?
Okay, so that shuttle trip, we did an incredible amount of work. Everything in the mission was successful. There were some scary moments. There were some triumphant moments. My favorite moment was at the end of the crew's last spacewalk. I was one of the spacewalkers, and I was on that spacewalk. We had the first spacewalk for me was very difficult, and I didn't finish all of my tasks, and I felt bad about that. But the second one, we got everything done. We were very happy with the results, and I was waiting outside the station airlock to come inside. My partner had a couple more things to clean up, and he was just about to come. So I'm hanging out there in space in my spacesuit, and at that time, the docked shuttle and space station stack came orbiting up diagonally across the Central Pacific and up toward the Pacific Northwest, which is where I'm from. We flew in February, and clear weather in February in Oregon is not guaranteed. In fact, it's kind of a miracle. But we were coming up on the west coast of the United States, and it was clear from British Columbia down to Baja, California. And there, spread out under me, was basically my whole past life, my childhood in Eugene, schooling in California, schooling up in Washington State, all the mountains, the beaches I used to play on as a kid, and all that came rolling up underneath me with perfectly clear weather, and you could see all the way from Canada to Mexico. And that was like the best present I ever got. It was so beautiful, so amazing to be in that place, watching the earth roll by underneath you, and so wonderful to see the lands of my childhood coming up underneath me while I was in a spacesuit hanging outside the International Space Station.
Carolyn is 6, and she would like to know what space food tastes like, and is it enjoyable? And I will tell you, your colleague Kjell Lindgren confessed that he actually likes the astronaut ice cream that we sell in the museum, which
Seriously?
Yeah, which I don't think is very tasty.
Well, it tastes good. In my opinion, the texture suffers somewhat because it's a little bit like chewing into a chunk of styrofoam. So space food does taste good. But they made it that way on purpose. So a lot of it is freeze dried. A lot of it is thermostabilized in pouches like you would get in military rations. Some of it is just plain dried. We don't have a refrigerator on the space station, so everything has to be stable for months and months and months at room temperature. So that does limit things a bit. Another problem with food in space is the first thing that happens when you get into space is your body, which is under gravity 100% of the time trying to pump fluid up out of your legs so your legs don't swell. That system keeps working when you're in space. So you get up there and your body says, oh, no gravity, but I'm still pumping fluid out of your lower body. So all the fluid rises up to your upper body. And it makes your head swell up a little bit. It makes your nasal passages swell up like you got a really bad cold. And you may know that when you have a cold and your nose is all stuffed up, your food tastes like cardboard. So early crews reported, they went up there, they ate their little food out of their tube, and they came back and they said, my food tastes like cardboard. You got to do something about this. So the easiest and cheapest way to make food flavor more intense is to add salt. So they added salt and they sent it up the crews and they say it still tastes like cardboard. So they added more salt and they added more salt and they added more salt. And eventually they got to where everybody liked the food in space, but they were getting 6,400 milligrams of sodium a day, which is like 5 times more than you're supposed to get for a healthy diet, which is okay for 2 weeks on the space shuttle, but for 6 months on the space station, bad for your body to eat that much sodium. So among other things, chowing that much sodium is bad for your calcium balance, which is bad for your bones. And your bones are already dumping calcium when you're up in space because they're not being loaded by gravity the way they are on the ground. You can come back from space with really weak bones, and we do not want people breaking legs just by walking when they come back from space. So they had to get the sodium down, and to do that, without making the food taste like cardboard again, they did a ton of work to use actual real spices, which cost 1,000 times more than salt. You can buy tons of salt for $1. It's cheap. Actual spices cost more, but they have reformulated the food. The sodium balance is better now, and the crews still report that it's good. But if you look carefully at pictures of space station crews gathered around the table for a meal, you will always see prominent bottles of hot sauce. It is all about the sauce. In my day, they were all using Tabasco. Some people still use that, but if you look more recently, there's a lot of sriracha out on the table on space station to help spice up the food a little bit.
Sriracha is one of my favorite hot sauces.
I used to live just down the road from the factory where they made it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I heard that after I left, they built a brand new factory because it suddenly became so popular. They had to build a new, bigger factory. And then the folks downwind of it were getting gassed by chili pepper. And they complained and they had to make some changes to the factory.
Well, I do like it. Tucker, who is 3 and it lives in Connecticut, wants to know if you can take music in space and what was your favorite. And I know that on the shuttle missions, they would play music to wake you up. Is that correct?
That is true. So Mission Control would play a tune to wake you up, chosen by your family, and each crew member sort of had their morning for their music, and they knew who it was going to be in ahead of time, so that person could be ready up on the flight deck with the microphone to thank their family. Although in my case, the first song they played for me, I didn't know what was coming, and the speaker on the space shuttle is very bad. So it was my day for music. I was up there. I was ready with the microphone. I was listening, and the speaker beeps to indicate a transmission from Mission Control. And then this sound comes out of the speaker. It was like, wah, 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 wah. It was like monsters gargling. I had no idea whatsoever what it was. And they only play like a 30-second snippet, and then you're supposed to say something nice about it. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that sound? I'm pretty sure my wife wouldn't send me monsters gargling. It turned out it was my young children singing in a musical they'd been in about a year before, and it was a bad recording on somebody's phone in a small theater, and then sent through the shuttle audio. But I did figure it out before I had to. So that's not the music that we listen to for entertainment up there. And yes, everybody brings music. We had iPods. I made a special playlist just for space with my favorite space songs on it. And I actually shared that with a radio station that I like in Seattle, and they were very excited about it. And I also made sure that I was playing a sort of a rockin' song the morning of launch, so that I'd have that in my head for the launch. So that was kind of fun. some of my favorite space songs, Space Oddity by David Bowie, of course. There's a song by Laurie Anderson called My Eyes, which is not specifically a space song, but if you listen to it in the context of space, it's got a lot of interesting lyrics. I like Bike Ride to the Moon by the Dukes of Stratosphere, or XTC by any other name. Let's see, T-Bone Burnett's song Humans from Earth is another one of my favorites. So there's a ton of really good space music out there.
Our next question, we have a lot of people asking, how long does it take to get to space? And that varies, but typically, how long does it take to get to space? And Mrs. Halter's class would like to know, how long do astronauts stay in space? And I know there's some different answers on the way you look at those questions, so I will let you answer those.
Okay, so getting to space, there is not actually that much difference. The physics of getting to space is you need to go fast, you need to go up to get above the atmosphere, and then you need to go forward to get so much forward speed that when your engine's cut off and gravity grabs you and starts pulling you down toward the surface, you are over the horizon and the Earth curves away from you as fast as you curve toward it. And that's what it really means to be in orbit, folks. There's still loads of gravity up there. You just don't feel it because you're falling and you're moving forward so fast that by the time you would hit the ground has curved away from you. You can't get your rocket going too fast too soon, A, because it's heavy and full of fuel, and B, because if it goes too fast too soon while the air is really dense, the aerodynamic forces might damage it, and you don't want that. So all told, when you put it all together, the amount of time it takes from lighting the engines on the launch pad, going up until the air gets thin, and then nosing over, and then going forward until you pick up orbital speed, no matter what vehicle you're in, it's kind of 8-ish minutes. It's about 8 minutes ride to orbit, then the engine's cut off, it gets real quiet, and you're floating. So no matter what your ride is, that's about how long it takes. I think maybe the SpaceX Dragon is maybe 9.5 minutes, but it's it's not going to take an hour, and it's not going to take 10 seconds. It's always sort of a 8 to 10-ish minutes. How long people stay in space? Pretty soon, we're going to have tourists that are flying suborbital space hops, and they'll be in space for 3 minutes, and then they'll come back down to Earth. Currently, for the space station, crew members launch up to the space station, and they stay for 6 months. When people go to the moon, it'll probably be about a 30-day round trip, although back in Apollo, it was a 7 to 10-day round trip. Mars would be a 3-year round trip. And there will probably be a lot of missions to space station with durations between about 30 days and about 6 months. After 6 months, it starts getting hard on your body, and people kind of wish they were home with their families, and it gets a little bit tougher. But if you were an astronaut in line to fly today, you would be expecting to fly to the space station, and you would expect your mission to last 6 months.
I would like to point out that it takes less time to get from the Earth into low Earth orbit than it does for me to commute from my house to Washington during rush hour.
Ma'am, if you had a rocket, it would be faster.
That's what I need.
You don't want to go that fast down low. It's bad. It's bad. It's real hot. You make a shock wave. It irritates people. Cops are going to pull you over for speeding.
Yeah, but I get to work faster.
You would get to work very fast. Then you'd have to slow down.
I think my bike is what I should stick with these days. We've got somebody heard that you mentioned Eugene, Oregon. They are a second grade class at Oregon at Clear Lake Elementary. And they are very excited to hear that there's an astronaut from Eugene. And we have a whole lot more students watching. Mrs. Sampson's 5th grade class from Par Excellent Academy, Cook Elementary School, Mrs. Richards' 5th grade. Oh, we gave a shout out to them already. And 2nd grade class from Fort Worth, and a whole bunch of homeschoolers are watching. We have somebody who Charlene is in South Africa, and would like to know, how do you mentally prepare to travel into space being so far away and in such a different environment?
Same way you would prepare for a long trip. So we have various simulators to practice working the spacecraft. For spacewalks, we have a giant swimming pool where you actually put on a spacesuit with an air supply, and in the water, you're weightless, so you can float up or down or any direction you like. You practice that way. You practice in various classrooms, just learning the facts of space travel and the systems that you're going to be working. There are small scale simulators that let you just practice with one system at a time. You practice teamwork in the T-38 trainer jet in all of the simulators and including in the spacewalk. So even when you're doing your spacewalk training, you're practicing working well with your teammate. So practice, 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 practice. My observation after being an astronaut for 20 years is that humans can be trained to do anything.
Our next question is from Mrs. Ward's class, and they would like to know, what is the most important research that still needs to be done in space?
Oh boy, there's a long, long list, and I can't even begin to touch all of it. Of course, space science, which is my background, we would love to know, how the sun and planets formed. We would love to know what the future of the solar system will be. We'd love to know if there's life on other planets. We now know there are other solar systems. For people in space, keeping people healthy when there's no gravity, that's still a big challenge. Keeping people psychologically happy when they're separated from their loved ones for a long time and under constant stress and high workload. There are little things like for going to Mars. If you ever buy medication and look at the label on it, after about a year, they say that medication's no good anymore. Well, we're going to send people to Mars on a 3-year trip. Their medications will all have expired. And what happens if somebody gets sick on the way back after 2.5 years in space? So figuring out how to preserve medications, figuring out how to preserve food. So that thermostabilized food that's not frozen gradually loses its nutritional value over the time scale of about a year. And so you can eat it and it will taste good and it will fill your stomach, but your body's not getting the nutrients it needs anymore. You can do an experiment like this of your own by eating only food that you would buy in a gas station for a year, because all that stuff is, stable forever, but not really very nutritious. So, and of course, frozen food with the full water weight, full weight of water in it and the freezer, and then trying to reject the waste heat from a freezer in space is a colossal problem. Long story, you'll get it when you learn your aerospace engineering. Heat rejection in space is kind of a problem. Anyway, so you can't just send a giant freezer full of heavy food because the spaceship won't be able to lift it. Keeping your bones from decaying when you're in space, keeping your muscles strong, getting your vestibular system that gives you your sense of balance. That works fine in gravity. When you leave gravity and go into space, everybody kind of gets an upset stomach for a couple of days. And there are two kinds of astronauts, those who admit it and those who don't. But the system kind of rewires itself, but when you come back, it has to rewire itself again. And if you were in space for a long time, that gets harder. So readjusting to gravity is hard. Space has radiation. Here on the surface of the Earth, we're protected from most space radiation by the Earth's magnetic field, and then also by our atmosphere, which blocks cosmic rays. Up in space, you don't have those protections, and so you're in kind of a constant, not immediately lethal radiation field, but it's not really very good for you either. So keeping people healthy under those circumstances for long duration is going to be a challenge as well. So lots and lots of problems to solve. And we would love to be able to have better engines so we can get to Mars and back faster than a 3-year round trip. For Mars, we need to learn how we're going to land heavy things like a habitat, 40-ton habitat on the surface instead of just a little lander like we landed on the moon with. Many, many, many problems that we have yet to solve. So job security.
We are almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you one last question. This is from the 5th grade class at Davenport, Oklahoma, and it's kind of a loaded question. What is your favorite part of the National Air and Space Museum?
I've only been there once, and it was long ago. But the lunar module that actually went to the moon, That one is hard to beat. And I would say the Discovery, but I wasn't on Discovery. That's over at the Varhese Center. I was on Atlantis, and that one's in Florida, and that's pretty good too. But the actual hardware that flew to the moon, that's got to be my fave.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. There are a couple of things that I want to alert our viewers to that we've got coming up. We want to share some of these additional History Day, these additional resources that'll help you with your History Day projects. You can search the National Air and Space Museum's archive collection using SOVA, the Smithsonian Online Virtual Archives. Search Smithsonian collections of personal papers, manuscripts, photographs, oral histories, films, and works of art, and other organizational records. Look for the blue icon to find the digitized materials. You can also learn more about the aircraft, spacecraft, equipment, art, and memorabilia in the museum's collection by searching our artifacts. For both of these, we will add links into the comment section on Facebook, so be sure to look for those. Also, STEM in 30 has released an entire episode on the importance of communication that includes historical figures, authors, and even athletes, so be sure to check that out. Today's live chat was the third in a series for National History Day focused on communication. One included space history, another one on aviation, and then, of course, the previous two are archived, and we will put those links into the comments below, and you can find them on the STEM in 30 social media platforms, on Facebook, Twitter. And we want to wish you all very good luck with your National History Day projects. And again, thank you all so much for watching. And Stan, thanks for being such a great storyteller and answering all of these wonderful questions we got in from viewers.
You're welcome. I am fortunate to have the opportunity to have such stories to tell.
Thanks again for watching. Everybody take care. Stay safe.